The Ohio Valley. In 1895, beneath the expanding routes of the new American Railroad, tired workers struck something unusually solid. A massive earthen mound was split wide open by their steel tools. Railroad crews expected to find simple Native American artifacts. They anticipated shattered pottery, flint arrowheads, or ordinary graves hidden in the dark soil. But the damp earth held a stranger secret. They pulled away the heavy dirt to reveal something utterly impossible. The ancient remains scattered inside simply defied all known human proportions. What they unearthed that afternoon immediately silenced the entire excavation crew. What did they actually pull from that damp Ohio earth? And why has history tried so hard to bury it again? At Echo Mysteries, we are dedicated to bringing forgotten anomalies to light. But we can't do it without you. If you feel that same thrill of uncovering the truth, please like and subscribe. Your support and comments are the fuel that keeps us digging into the ancient secrets of our past. Let us know below. Autumn in Ohio, 1895. A sprawling network of iron tracks was aggressively consuming the American Midwest. Railroad crews were systematically leveling. John was a seasoned laborer accustomed to the grueling rhythm of the pickaxe. His crew was tasked with flattening a massive mound. These silent hills dotted the region, mostly ignored by the rushing industrial age. The work was exhausting, moving tons of soil. They expected to find tangled roots, thick clay, and perhaps scattered animal bones. Instead, John's heavy iron tool struck something solid. He brushed away the dark, moist earth to reveal a smooth, pale surface. It was not a stone, nor a common beast. The object emerging from the dirt was undeniably a human skull, but its physical dimensions completely defied basic anatomical logic. It was nearly twice the size of a normal adult cranium. The sheer thickness suggested an imposing, terrifying physical strength. They dug frantically, unearthing the rest of the massive skeletal frame. The femur bones alone were impossibly long, resembling thick tree branches. When fully exposed, the entire skeleton stretched across the excavated trench in the dirt. It measured easily over 8 feet from heel to the top of the skull. The jawbone was massive enough to fit comfortably over John's entire face. The crew stood frozen, staring down at a biological impossibility. Word of the monstrous discovery spread rapidly to the nearby settlement. A local reporter arrived the next morning, notebook in hand. Completely bewildered, the regional newspaper quickly printed a sensational front-page story about the ancient giant. Farmers and townspeople gathered around the muddy trench to witness the anomaly themselves. For a brief moment, this county held the greatest archaeological secret in modern history. They believed this monumental find would rewrite the human timeline. The bones remained exposed under the pale autumn sun, waiting for proper scientific examination. Local authorities placed guards, anticipating immense national interest and academic glory. But the glory never materialized, because 3 days later, a train arrived. A group of stern, well-dressed men stepped off, bearing official government documentation. They introduced themselves as elite scholars, representing prestigious East Coast institutions. They carried an aura of absolute authority and demanded immediate, unrestricted site access. Armed with federal papers, they swiftly dismissed the local authorities and the bewildered railroad crew from the site. Large, unmarked wooden crates were immediately brought down into the muddy excavation trench. Working quickly under the dusk, they dismantled the massive skeleton piece by piece. Every bone, every fragment, every trace was packed in silence. The local reporter was firmly instructed to stop asking questions and destroy his photographic plates immediately. By dawn, the enigmatic scholars and their heavy crates had completely vanished from the town, leaving an empty pit and a lingering sense of dread. Official records of the incredible discovery were immediately suppressed or conveniently lost. The townspeople were eventually convinced that they had merely hallucinated an oversized mastodon fossil in the Ohio dirt. The railroad tracks were laid over the empty hole, burying the event forever. This swift, ruthless confiscation established a terrifying pattern of institutional erasure. And here is where the historical cover-up becomes truly chilling. Cardiff, New York. In the crisp autumn of 1869, a mundane farm task completely shattered the boundaries of reality. Two laborers were hired by a local farmer named William Newell. They were instructed to dig a simple water well behind his main barn, at a depth of merely 3 feet. Their heavy shovels scraped against an immense, hardened mass. They aggressively cleared the damp upstate soil. What they revealed was a petrified colossus. It was a remarkably detailed, 10-foot-tall stone man locked in a posture of eternal agony. The sheer scale of the figure was incomprehensible. The anatomical proportions were terrifying. Word of the monstrous fossil instantly bled beyond the quiet farm. Newell swiftly erected a massive exhibition tent over the open dirt pit. He transformed a muddy trench into a highly lucrative attraction overnight. For a hefty admission fee, awestruck citizens gazed down at the petrified titan. The local attraction immediately became a national obsession. The sensation spread with the cataclysmic speed of a wildfire. Trains from across the rapidly expanding nation brought tens of thousands of spectators. Curious sightseers, desperate scholars, and fervent religious believers flooded Newell's property. Why did an increasingly modern society surrender its collective logic so effortlessly? Because the burgeoning American press apparatus actively fed their wildest imaginations. Newspapers operating under the ruthless era of yellow journalism recognized an absolute goldmine. Editors demanded sensational, oversized headlines. They printed breathless accounts detailing an ancient, towering race that once dominated the North American landscape. They deliberately bypassed rigorous scientific verification. They chose staggering circulation numbers over boring archaeological facts. The Cardiff Giant became a powerful psychological virus. It deeply infected the public consciousness. People openly wept at the edge of the pit. They were convinced they were witnessing the literal foundations of biblical mythology. The nation was entirely captivated. They believed this was undeniable physical proof of a violently erased epoch. But here is where the historical narrative begins to unravel completely. Prominent scientists eventually forced their way through the crowds. Top paleontologists and elite geologists meticulously analyzed the surface of the gargantuan corpse. What they discovered immediately demolished the illusion. It was not petrified human flesh. It was not ancient, fossilized bone. It was absolutely not an extinct prehistoric king. It was a massive, solid block of common gypsum. Newell had deliberately orchestrated the entire spectacle. He hired sculptors in Chicago. He treated the stone with harsh acids to artificially simulate immense age. He then buried it on his own property, a full year prior to its miraculous discovery. It was a brilliant, deeply cynical hoax designed for financial exploitation. Leading academics publicly condemned the giant as a pathetic, laughable fraud. Yet, this definitive debunking did not matter at all. The undeniable truth simply arrived too late. The American public had already developed a ravenous, unstoppable appetite for monumental mysteries. The fraudulent stone giant had successfully lit the match. The media machinery was primed. Every unusually large bone was weaponized into a highly profitable, apocalyptic headline. Bradford County, Pennsylvania, deep in the Appalachian woods. Local antiquarians targeted a seemingly ordinary mound. They cracked open the damp earth. They expected to find typical pottery shards. They anticipated primitive stone tools. Instead, they extracted a visceral nightmare. The skulls pulled from the dirt were ungodly. They were massive in their basic dimensions. But the overall size was not the most terrifying detail. They possessed thick, bony protrusions. Solid horns grew directly above the brow ridges. Skeletal remains attached to these demonic crowns were incredibly large. Excavators confidently estimated the bodies at over 7 feet. Local press machinery instantly exploded. They printed terrifying, unverified headlines. They dubbed them the unholy giants of deep woods. They painted vivid pictures of a monstrous ancient race. They described violent titans roaming the early American hills. Citizens grew deeply unsettled by the grotesque biological anomalies. The bones resting in the local exhibitions were physically real. They were dense, they were heavy, they were undeniably ancient. They sat silently in glass display cases. They seemingly challenged every known law of modern human evolution. It was the perfect physical proof for a highly superstitious public. But here is where the physical anatomy abruptly halts the terrifying narrative. The cold science eventually caught up with the hysterical press. In a 2020 retrospective analysis, modern researchers stepped in. Scholars at the Robert S. Peabody Institute systematically dissected the myth. They meticulously reviewed the surviving archaeological records of the horned giants. The unearthly truth was remarkably terrestrial. The terrifying horns were not biological extensions of the human skull. They were actually deer antlers. These antlers were carefully placed on the heads of the deceased as part of a complex ancient burial ritual. Over centuries of intense subterranean pressure, the materials shifted. The bone and antler compressed tightly together in the dense soil. Untrained local excavators simply ripped them out blindly. They pulled the remains from the dirt in one solid, fused chunk. Furthermore, many massive femur bones proudly displayed across the region were completely misidentified. They did not belong to a lost race of towering human titans. They were simply the fragmented remains of prehistoric mastodons. These massive beasts once roamed the ancient North American continent. Early farmers routinely plowed up their massive bones during agricultural work. The newspapers of the era deliberately ignored these boring anatomical realities. A scattered mastodon bone sells a few local copies. A horned demonic giant sells out the entire national print run. The terrifying legends were carefully and deliberately constructed. They were built entirely from a volatile mixture of biological ignorance and aggressive marketing. This era thrived on sensationalism. Washington, D.C., 1881. The sprawling American landscape was covered in thousands of enigmatic earthen structures. Congress officially mandated the newly formed Bureau of Ethnology to investigate immediately. They needed definitive answers about the mysterious architects. Enter Cyrus Thomas, an ambitious entomologist turned pioneer. He was generously funded by the prestigious and powerful Smithsonian Institution. Thomas did not merely conduct a few isolated, quiet local digging operations. He orchestrated a massive, unprecedented archaeological sweep across 21 distinct states. His dedicated field agents relentlessly scoured the sprawling Mississippi River Valley. They penetrated the dense, deeply humid forests of the American South. They meticulously excavated massive earthworks in Ohio, Illinois, and distant Wisconsin. It was a highly organized, federally backed operation of truly staggering proportions. His team systematically opened thousands of ancient mounds over a chaotic decade. They meticulously catalogued an overwhelming mountain of artifacts. Over 40,000 distinct historical items were shipped back to Washington. Among these endless wooden crates were skeletal remains. They removed these indigenous bodies from their ancient resting places permanently. The sheer volume of material terrified local observers and paranoid journalists. It looked exactly like a massive, coordinated federal cover-up of epic scale. Why was the government so desperate to hoard these ancient human bones? The conspiracy theorists firmly believed the Smithsonian was actively hiding the giants. They assumed Thomas was intentionally destroying the physical evidence of a towering race. The dark vaults of the museum supposedly swallowed the monstrous, impossible skeletons. Public suspicion reached an absolute boiling point during these aggressive, sweeping expeditions. But here is where the institutional narrative takes a deeply fascinating turn. The true motive behind this sweeping confiscation was not supernatural or malicious concealment. Thomas finally published his report on the mound explorations in 1894. This monumental, groundbreaking document spanned over 700 highly detailed, dense pages. It fundamentally and permanently obliterated the wildly popular myth of a lost race. The meticulous scientific data proved theories were completely and utterly baseless. The thousands of collected skeletons did not possess impossible, unearthly physical dimensions. They perfectly matched the exact anatomical profiles of ordinary, naturally sized humans. Thomas used rigid empirical data to dismantle the deeply racist Victorian assumptions. The American public desperately wanted to believe in a vanished, superior civilization. They stubbornly refused to credit the ancestors of marginalized Native American tribes. The Smithsonian expeditions were specifically designed to establish a rigid scientific baseline. They aggressively aimed to replace sensational newspaper rumors with hard, physical evidence. The massive centralized collection of bones was not a malicious federal cover-up. It was simply the brutal, highly comprehensive birth of modern American archaeology. They gathered everything to comprehensively map the true, unbroken indigenous historical timeline. The real tragedy was not the secret destruction of mythical giant bones. It was the aggressive, systematic removal of indigenous ancestors from sacred ground. The government agents prioritized cold scientific cataloging over basic spiritual respect entirely. Was this an act of historical preservation or unforgivable, massive cultural theft? The complicated truth still echoes within those endless, dusty institutional storage vaults. The physical evidence gathered by the Smithsonian teams fundamentally shifted the academic paradigm. Years of meticulous biological cataloging finally replaced the wild frontier speculations. The thousands of examined skeletons revealed an undeniable, incredibly consistent biological truth. They belonged entirely to the direct ancestors of modern Native American populations. The towering, mystical white giants of the 19th century press simply did not exist anywhere. They were entirely fictional constructs born from deep cultural prejudice and arrogant colonial assumptions. European settlers simply could not fathom the true origins of these massive earthworks. They looked at the highly complex, geometrically perfect earthen pyramids scattered across the continent. They observed the sophisticated astronomical alignments embedded deeply within the ancient soil. They stubbornly refused to credit these monumental engineering achievements to the indigenous tribes. The pervasive racism of the era demanded a completely different, more palatable historical narrative. The public desperately conjured a lost, superior race of giants to claim the architectural glory. The official federal report completely dismantled this deeply entrenched, heavily romanticized historical theft. Cyrus Thomas presented an overwhelming mountain of irrefutable, hard archaeological data to the academic world. His comprehensive skeletal analysis proved a continuous, unbroken biological lineage spanning thousands of years. The cranial measurements perfectly matched the indigenous peoples living right beside the ancient monuments. Furthermore, the cultural artifacts pulled from the deepest, oldest mound layers confirmed this direct connection. The pottery styles, the intricate copper ornaments, and the carved stone pipes showed clear cultural evolution. They were not scattered remnants of mysterious alien civilizations, but the proud legacy of organized Native American societies. The Hopewell and Mississippian cultures possessed vast, complex trade networks stretching across the entire continent. They successfully mobilized thousands of skilled workers to construct these massive, sacred civic centers. Their architectural sophistication easily rivaled the celebrated ancient builders of the old European world. The carefully planned cities built around these massive mounds supported thriving, dense ancient populations. But the real revelation hidden in the federal archives was far more profound than any conspiracy. The Smithsonian did not suppress history. They validated the incredible majesty of ancient indigenous American engineering. The extensive cataloging project ultimately preserved the physical proof of native sovereignty over the land. The federal government inadvertently documented the absolute brilliance of the original American civilizations. The dark conspiracy theories completely missed the actual, documented scientific victory hiding in plain sight. The sensational rumors of hidden giant bones actively distracted the public from a much greater truth. A highly advanced, indigenous civilization had thrived and built massive empires right beneath their feet. The immense dirt pyramids were not the tombs of mythological, oversized prehistoric conquerors. They were the enduring, silent testaments to Native American ingenuity, complex social structure, and spiritual dedication. The scientific community finally handed the stolen history back to its rightful, original architects. The monumental earthen structures stood as undisputed evidence of an incredibly rich, sophisticated native heritage. The giant narrative was finally buried forever beneath the heavy weight of verified historical fact on the digital battlefield. In the chaotic landscape of modern American social media, a massive bombshell suddenly dropped. A terrifying headline screamed across millions of glowing smartphone feeds. The United States Supreme Court had allegedly forced the prestigious Smithsonian Institution to confess. The viral posts enthusiastically claimed a historic, completely unprecedented legal victory. They confidently stated the museum was finally ordered to declassify thousands of secret documents. These hidden papers supposedly admitted to the systematic, deliberate destruction of giant human skeletons. The alleged motive was deeply sinister. The government supposedly wanted to protect the fragile, mainstream timeline of human evolution. They needed to hide the biblical truth from the general public. This explosive story spread with terrifying, virtually unstoppable velocity. It completely dominated underground web forums. It hijacked massive Facebook conspiracy groups across the country. Countless amateur internet sleuths proudly shared the headline as absolute, undeniable proof. They felt deeply vindicated after decades of being called crazy. The grand, century-old cover-up was finally being exposed by the highest court in the land. The academic establishment was finally crumbling under the heavy weight of judicial truth. People recorded angry podcast episodes about the massive betrayal. They demanded immediate accountability from federal historians. The digital outrage was entirely genuine. The public anger was incredibly loud. But here is where the grand internet conspiracy completely embarrasses itself. Independent investigators from Snopes and the Associated Press immediately tracked the explosive claims. They meticulously followed the massive digital footprint back to its absolute, unquestionable origin. What they found was not a heavily redacted, classified government document. It was not a leaked Supreme Court order. It was not a brave federal whistleblower risking their life and career. The entire sweeping narrative was a completely fabricated, literal joke. The original story was actually published in 2014 by The World News Daily Report. This specific website was a well-known, unapologetic satirical publication. It was legally registered as a fake news entertainment portal. The mischievous authors simply invented the dramatic court case and the Supreme Court ruling. They even wrote a fake, groveling apology from a fictional Smithsonian director. They wrote it purely to generate cheap laughs and highly profitable clickbait ad revenue. Yet, the ruthless internet algorithm stripped away the satirical context entirely. It repackaged the obvious joke as a violently suppressed historical truth. The modern American public eagerly consumed the digital bait without a single second of critical thought. The desperate desire to expose a massive institutional lie completely overrode basic reading comprehension. They willingly replaced the heavy, dusty physical bones of the 19th century with easily manipulated digital pixels. The century-old giant hoax simply evolved to survive in the modern era. It no longer required a clever farmer with a shovel and a carved stone block. It only required a catchy headline, a convenient share button, and an audience absolutely desperate to believe the impossible. The greatest cover-up was simply our own collective refusal to read the fine print. The mysterious number 7 remains the final psychological anomaly in this mythology. Scan through every legitimate 19th century newspaper archive across the United States. Scour the thousands of detailed pages of the official federal excavation reports. You will never find this highly cited numerical figure anywhere in the actual physical records. The 7 ancient skeletons simply do not exist in documented history. They exist entirely within the ruthless architecture of modern algorithmic engagement. Content creators deliberately engineered this specific number to weaponize basic human curiosity. The human brain naturally gravitates toward prime numbers and highly specific lists. A vague claim about scattered ancient bones is easily ignored during a mindless digital scroll. But exactly 7 hidden titans implies a highly organized, deeply sinister federal catalog. It creates a terrifyingly precise illusion of classified institutional knowledge. This is a manufactured digital Mandela effect actively occurring in real time. Millions of Americans now vividly remember historical facts fabricated by anonymous internet forums. The title of this very narrative was deliberately structured using that exact psychological trigger. We inherently want the ancient world to fit cleanly into a numbered format. We desperately crave a simple list of terrifying historical anomalies to distract us. But genuine archaeology is rarely that clean or perfectly categorized. True historical truth completely resists the cheap formatting of viral social media platforms. The damp dirt of the ancient mounds holds thousands of incredibly complex human stories. It holds the profound, verifiable legacy of brilliant indigenous civilizations spanning centuries. It absolutely does not hold 7 mythological monsters waiting to be unlocked on a trending digital timeline. The ancient earthen mounds still sit silently across the American landscape. They remain deeply covered by thick grass and modern paved highways. We stare at these massive structures and desperately crave a mystery. We actively choose terrifying fiction over the brilliant indigenous historical reality. The mythical giants were never actually buried deep in the dirt. They were entirely forged within the dark corners of our imagination. Institutions simply gathered the scattered fragments of a profound human past. Yet the seductive rumors of towering ancient monsters will never fade. What other comfortable historical lies are we secretly choosing to believe?